I can't tell you how many times I've heard or read someone say that God designed marriage for one man and one woman. But is that actually scriptural? We only get one real example of marriage as God designed it before sin, but that example has a lot to say about what in marriage is essential and what's incidental. The more you study it, the more you see that Adam and Eve being a straight couple was not what made them suited for marriage. Genesis 2 tells the story of God creating Adam and bringing him into relationship with his Etzer Kenegdo. That phrase in Hebrew is usually translated as suitable helper, but that makes it sound like a butler. No, an Etzer is an indispensable partner that you'd be helpless without. God is said to be Israel's Etzer in Deuteronomy and Psalms. Kenegdo describes how well you work together, not how different you are. It evokes the image of two beams stood against each other, each needing the strength, support, and resistance of the other to stand tall. Importantly, nothing about these words indicates a specific gender for the Etzer Kenegdo. It requires them to be a different sex about as much as it requires them to have a different eye color or dominant hand. So God creates Eve out of Adam's side and brings her to him, which can be a video all its own. And Adam's reaction is, "This is bone of my bone and flesh of my flesh." That phrase in Hebrew expresses a deep kinship bond that supersedes biological family, but it's not gendered. Adam is not saying, "This is someone with complementary sexual organs." No, he's saying, "This is someone who feels like a part of me, who feels like they were made for me." Bone of my bone and flesh of my flesh are used throughout Scripture, including between people of the same sex. They are never used to specify a man-woman pair. The phrase recognizes a deep spiritual bond that is unconcerned with gender. It's this recognition from Adam that Genesis 2:24 commissions as the reason for a couple to get married. It tells this whole story and then says, "Al Ken, a man will leave his father and mother and be united to his wife, and they will become one flesh." The Hebrew phrase al ken is translated therefore or for this reason, but that leaves it ambiguous as to whether the specifics of the example, that is one man and one woman, is important to the response being illustrated, that is leaving your family to unite with your Etzer Kenegdo. But fortunately, we can look at how al ken is used throughout Scripture to get our answer. Psalm 25:8 says, "Good and upright is the Lord. Al ken, therefore, he instructs sinners in his ways." It's the exact same structure, and no one would argue that only sinners can receive the instruction of God's ways. In fact, the implication is if even sinners are instructed in God's ways, then there is no one that he withholds his instruction from. Genesis 2:24 is doing much the same thing. Notice how the man is leaving his family for the woman. Ancient culture would have expected the woman to have to leave for the man, and would have expected the new couple to continue living under the authority of the man's father. The hypothetical marriage described here is downright scandalous. Violating cultural norms is clearly not a reason to avoid marrying your Etzer Kenegdo, and nothing in these passages suggests that gender is exempt from that. The final statement about the couple in 2:24 is that they will become one flesh, and at this point it shouldn't surprise you that one flesh in Hebrew is not male-female specific. It definitely evokes physical intimacy as an expression of spiritual intimacy, but nowhere is that intimacy's ability to create children held as significant. Song of Songs is a whole book of erotic poetry celebrating a one-flesh bond, and procreation is nowhere to be found. It's that spiritual bond, that unification with your Etzer Kenegdo that's important to one flesh, and physical intimacy is just an outpouring of that bond, regardless of gender. So when we study the original vision for marriage in Genesis, exemplified by Adam and Eve and this hypothetical couple, we see clearly that opposite genders are not essential to marriage, but incidental to the examples. And yeah, sin enters the world in the very next chapter and screws everything up, but that original vision remains, and that's what we're to aspire to as Christians. If God's description of a relationship suited for marriage is universally unconcerned with their gender, then we have no reason to forbid someone from marrying their Etzer Kenegdo just because they happen to be someone of the same sex. As Jesus says in Matthew 19 when commenting on Genesis 2:24, "What God has joined together, let no one separate."